Okay, so let's take a look at one of these hybrid main conclusion, most strongly supported questions. First of all, I want to point out that you can't tell what you're dealing with just from looking at the question stem, which says which one of the following most logically completes the argument. A question stem like this is paired with a blank present in the stimulus. Okay, so of the entire set of questions with a blank, only a subset are asking for conclusions. How do you know which subset is asking for a conclusion? Well, you'll have to look at the words before it. You have to contextualize this blank, in other words. Here, I spotted therefore. Therefore is a conclusion indicator. It tells me that the stuff above is being used as premise, and it's attempting to support something, which means we're looking to fill in the blank with a conclusion. Okay, so if the LSAT writers change the words that precede the blank, perhaps you're not looking for a conclusion. You might be looking for a premise. Right? If they say since, right? Since something. Well, since indicates support. It indicates premises. So anyway, you identify this hybrid main conclusion dash most strongly supported question by first looking for the blank and second noticing some kind of conclusion indicator before the blank to signal to us that yes, indeed, we are looking to use everything that we're reading above as premise to try to support this blank. Okay, so that's the question stem identification part. Now let's take a look at this stimulus, which you might notice has only one sentence. This is a very convoluted, grammatically convoluted sentence. In fact, this is the sentence that inspired the lesson on grammar, on modifiers and embedded clauses that we did a couple of lessons ago. So the first thing I want to point out is just how nested this whole sentence is. At the highest level, the subject is just advertisers. Advertisers what? What's the predicate? Advertisers have learned X. That's it, right? Like at the highest level, the sentence reduces to advertisers have learned X. That's it. Complete sentence. See, but that's not very helpful because it's precisely what this X is that's confusing. All the difficulty, all the details, all the complexity, and all the information is packed in this X. And this X is actually a full sentence on its own. It's a clause embedded within a larger sentence. Right? Within this X, let's unpack it. Right? What are we saying? We're saying people are more easily encouraged to develop positive attitudes, right? About what? About things. You see, it's already starting to get really detailed. People are more easily encouraged to develop positive attitudes about things. What kind of things? About things toward which they originally have neutral or even negative attitudes. That's the first part, if you will, of this idea, is that we're talking about how to more easily encourage someone to change their mind about a thing which originally they were neutral or even negative about the thing. How to change their mind so that they become positive about the thing. Okay, so this is a thing which originally either the person was neutral or even negative. We're saying, how do we make it so that they develop positive attitudes towards the thing, right? And more easily encouraged to do that. And here's the second part of the sentence. This is the part which is explicitly comparative, right? Rather than if those things are linked with pictorial help rather than exclusively through prose to things about which they already have positive attitudes. Right? This is where you know that we are doing a comparison. But before we get to the comparison, I want to deconstruct the grammar. What they're doing with what the LSAT writers are doing here is they're saving space. They're trading up clarity for efficiency. It's harder to understand what these three lines are saying, but the information is more compact. Okay? Now, we have to read the sentence like this. If those things are linked with pictorial help, skip all this. If those things are linked with pictorial help to things about which they already have positive attitudes, that's one half of the comparison. The other half of the comparison reads like this. If those things are linked, skip all of this exclusively through prose to things about which they already have positive attitudes. So see, it's in this middle bit that we're toggling. This piece of the language stays put. This piece of the language stays put. In one version, this piece runs through this middle piece to the second piece. In another version, this piece runs through this piece over here to the second piece. So let me map it out here so it's more clear what's happening. Okay, so I just copied this part over. Now this next part is the part where it splits, right? The rather than is what tells you how it's splitting. Okay, so this part is linked to the rest of the sentence. Rather than is in the middle. So one route is above, one route is below. The above route is with pictorial help, and the below route is exclusively through prose. And here they rejoin, they re-meet, right, to things. And here's just the rest of the sentence, to things about which they already have positive attitudes. Okay, so you see how this sentence works? And do you see what I mean when I say economy of expression? By presenting the sentence this way, the LSAT writers avoided having to repeat this clause and having to repeat this clause, right? Because they're basically telling us through the use of the rather than, they're saying, okay, first read it this way, right? Read the sentence this way. So if those things are linked with pictorial help to things about which they already have positive attitudes. Not that this is like a super easy to understand sentence in its own right, but surely it's simpler than the together version, right? So you read it this way first, and then you say, oh, compared to what? Rather than compared to if those things are linked exclusively through prose to things about which they already have positive attitudes. Okay, so this is the spatially represented, where I'm using space to represent the grammar of this claim over here. So that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're comparing, right? That's the comparison over here where in one world, we're taking those things, and here, right, there's referential phrasing going on, of course, right? Those things refers to what things? The things toward which they originally have neutral or even negative attitudes. Right, that's the things that we're talking about. What are we doing with those things? We're linking those things towards which people are initially indifferent or even negative about. We're taking those things and we're linking those things through pictures on the one hand to some other things, right? What other things? Well, here's the descriptor of those other things. The other things are things about which the people already have positive attitudes, right? So I want you to be able to do this grammatical analysis, because that's how you're going to be able to do this next thing, which is take this abstract language and make it tangible. Come up with an example. They're talking about advertisers, right? You can imagine that the advertisers are trying to sell you those things, whatever it is that they're trying to sell you. And these might be things, it might be a new product, so people are indifferent to the product, or it might be an existing product that people are very negative about, cigarettes, right? Oh, but you know what? Cigarettes, yeah, people are pretty negative about cigarettes, but what if we link them with the help of pictures to other things? What are the things? Things about which people already have positive, like a famous, beautiful movie star smoking a cigarette. So then this thing, the cigarette, which is negative, if we link it, if we show a famous movie star smoking cigarettes, then that thing, the cigarette, right, we might change their minds so that people are positive about cigarettes. Right, so there are two ways to link cigarettes to a movie star, right, to something else about which people are already positive. One way is to do it through a picture. The other way is to do it exclusively through words. That's what we're comparing. Picture, and here I am dramatically, like way oversimplifying, right, way oversimplifying. In order to get the full version of what this is, and the full version of this, you have to, this is basically calling up this path, whereas this is calling up this path, right? That's what we're comparing. And comparing the two, we're saying which one more easily changes people's attitudes about a thing which originally they were neutral negative to positive. And which one wins? Not surprisingly, this just happens to accord with common sense. The picture route wins. Okay, so that was the hard part. Taking this ridiculously long sentence, convoluted sentence, and breaking it down, analyzing the grammar of the sentence. So, but hopefully you see what I mean when I say, like, do you understand what this sentence is trying to say? Hopefully the answer is yes, right? Hopefully the answer is yes. Now the question is, how did you get to this answer yes? Grammar, that's how, right? That's my very firm conviction that difficulty of understanding a lot of these claims on LR is just the convoluted grammar. So once we understand that advertisers have learned that you want to get people to change their attitude about a thing from negative to positive, the easier way to do it is by linking that thing through a picture to something else that they already feel positive about, as opposed to linking that thing through words alone to something that they already feel positive about. What do you think advertisers are going to do? Well, they're going to put it in action, right? They just learned this quirk of consumer psychology, right? They learned that people are just, it turns out they're like this. Right? Well, yeah, I would guess that they're going to put it into action. So now let's take a look at the answers. First, we'll look at D. What do you think about D? Highlight. Their advertisers are likely to highlight the desirable features of the advertised product by contrasting them pictorially with the undesirable features of a competing product. What do you think? Advertisers are likely to do that? Do you think that supports, like you take D, you pop it over here, you think support flows from these claims into this claim? Well, again, it depends on what your understanding is of what D is saying. D is saying that advertisers are going to highlight the desirable features of their product, of their advertised product. And they're going to do this highlighting through a contrast. By contrasting them referring to what? Referential phrase, right? Them referring to the desirable features. By contrasting the desirable features of their advertised product, pictorially contrasting, right? This is a modifier of how they're going to contrast. They could contrast it through prose. Here they're going to contrast pictorially with the not desirable features of a competing product. So what D is saying is we're going to use pictures to showcase the desirable features of our cigarettes versus competitors' cigarettes, right? We're going to highlight the desirable features of our cigarettes, and we're going to highlight the undesirable features of competitor cigarettes. And we're going to do this highlighting through pictures. So hopefully, now that we've fleshed out what the sentence is trying to say, you realize that it's not the right answer because it's not anything close to what the advertisers just learned about consumer psychology. What the advertisers just learned about consumer psychology is that cigarettes, if cigarettes were a thing about which consumers, right, already were negative and you want them to be positive about cigarettes, well, what do? What you do is you link cigarettes pictorially to something else about which consumers already felt positive. You know, I gave the example of a A-list movie star smoking a cigarette. Whatever is going on in D, it's got nothing to do with what the advertisers learned about consumer psychology. Something else is going on in D. They're saying take our cigarettes, take the competitor cigarettes. Let's highlight desirable features of our cigarettes, contrast them with the undesirable features of competitor cigarettes, and let's do all of this not through words, but rather through pictures. Do you see, like at a very superficial level, D might be attractive because it's using a lot of the same concepts, same words, right, that we saw in the stimulus, but I don't know how else to stress this. That's just a trap, right? Of course, LSAT writers are not going to start writing about something completely out of left field. Like if D were an answer about textual interpretation as a constitutional law, you'd just immediately be like, what the hell, right? Of course, the LSAT writers, to make D attractive, will have to use the words that you found in the stimulus and repeat them in some different combination. But by actually understanding what D is saying, hopefully it's very, very clear that it is wrong. If you put D into this blank, it receives no support at all from the premises above. What do you think about B? Try to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about products that can better be represented pictorially than in prose. That sounds right? I mean, that sounds like what we talked about here. Advertisers, we can more easily get people to feel positive about a thing if we pictorially link the thing to something else they feel positive about. So isn't that like what they're saying over here? Well, again, to find out the answer to that, we have to really understand what B is trying to say. What is B trying to say? Advertisers are trying to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about products. What kind of products? The rest of this just describes the type of products that advertisers are likely to try to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about, right? The rest of this is saying products that can be better represented pictorially than in prose. So now you think about all your products, all the possible products there are. Now, it just turns out some products are better represented pictorially than in prose, right? Like if you think about a car, A car is probably a product that pictures can represent better. Okay, in fact, I think most products are probably products that a picture can represent better. Just think about how many words it takes to describe the product versus you can just show the product, right? So I would guess most products fit into this better represented pictorially than in prose. So B is saying advertisers are likely to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about that kind of product, the kind of product that is more easily represented pictorially. Well, that's like just about everything. See, the point I'm making here is that B is emphasizing the distinction between products that can be better represented, and here's where it splits, either pictorially or in prose. Right? That's the two kinds of products that B is trying to make a distinction on. On the one hand, we have products that can be better represented with a picture. On the other hand, we have products that I'm actually hard pressed to think of a product that can be better represented in prose, but I presume they exist. Right? And B is trying to make a distinction between those two types of products. It's saying that advertisers are likely to focus their attention to try to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about the first type of product. Again, how does that fit into what the advertisers just learned about consumer psychology, right? It doesn't. Because what the advertisers just learned about consumer psychology, notice that they didn't make a distinction here. They didn't say, oh, this thing, only if this thing is a thing which can better be represented pictorially, right? Oh, but what if this thing is a thing that can be better represented in prose? Well, forget this. We're not going to do any of this. No, nowhere did the advertisers learn that. You see, when the advertisers talked about this thing here, they didn't make a distinction about whether this thing can better be represented pictorially or in prose. They just said, whatever this thing is, consumers have negative or neutral attitudes about the thing. Okay, let's change it so that they have positive attitudes about the thing. And we can more easily do that if we take that thing and we link it to some other thing about which they are already positive. And it has to do with how we link it. This is the better way to link it, with pictures. So once again, B, like the previous answer choice, sounds at a superficial level, sounds very similar to what we're talking about, right? But you have to understand what B is actually saying in order to understand why, if you take B and you pop it over here, you slot it over here into the fill in the blank, it receives no support from the statements above. Okay, so I just want to look at one more answer choice, which is E, and this is the correct answer choice. But the question is why? Why is it that if we put E over here into the blank, this makes for a good argument? I mean, not like an airtight argument, but certainly E, the claims in E, receives support from the statements above, right? Well, again, just like why the two previous answers were wrong, you have to understand what E is saying to understand why E is right. E says advertisers are likely to create advertisements containing pictures of things. What things, right? Modified, right? Things modified. Things that most members of the target audience already like, right? It's crucial that this word most is here because it makes sense. The whole point is you have a thing you're trying to sell. Well, you're going to create an advertisement of the thing, right? Because you want to change the consumer's attitude from negative or neutral over to positive. Right? That's what advertisements are for. And what advertisers learned about consumer psychology is that the way to do that is to link those things through pictures, right? Advertising through pictures to what? To some other things about which consumers already like. So here, all E did was add in this most. And if you think about that, it makes sense. What are advertisers trying to do? They're trying to sell, right? Surely you wouldn't want to sell to few, right? Of course you want to sell to most. Knowing that advertisers understand this about consumer psychology, it makes sense to say that therefore they're likely to attempt this.